Hi, Michael here. Before we get started on this week's fun, I need your help. It doesn't matter if you're a long-standing listener or this is your first time, we would love for you to be part of helping this podcast grow. So please make sure if you enjoy this episode, then please recommend it to friends and family. And thank you very much for helping our audience grow. Right, now down to the good stuff. This week on the Sports Initiative podcast, I sit down with former USA age group coach Larry Sunderland. Now the Director of Player Development at FC Cincinnati, Larry discusses his current role and the pathway through the club, how they integrate goal scoring into their curriculum and why they place such an emphasis on this, and the challenges that can be faced when located in different environments. I hope you enjoy. Perfect, Larry. So thank you very much for jumping on. I guess the first question is, how are you? How's Cincinnati? And yeah, how was life?
Well, Michael, first, thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to speak with you about the life of football, I guess, and compare what it's like maybe on that side of the pond to what it's like over here in the States. In Cincinnati, we're managing. I think we're trying to be hopeful with the current state of the pandemic. I think fortunately our academy players, our first team players will be back on the field soon, but our academy players are on the field now, and it's somewhat normal. They have different protocols. They don't have access to certain things that they maybe had access to prior to the pandemic, but at least our guys are on the field and they're training, and there's a feeling of normalcy to what they're doing, soccer wise, football wise. So I think that's a positive for us. There's always this apprehension, I think, now that everybody kind of has in the back of their mind. When is the next lockdown coming? Are things getting better? Are things getting worse? But we're trying to remain hopeful and think that the best is somewhat soon around the corner.
Yeah, hopefully some light at the end of the tunnel for everyone. I think that's what would be needed. So for people that don't kind of know your background, obviously we've gone back and forth. I've done a little bit of research, quite distinguished. Do you just want to talk to people kind of what role you're in at the moment, and what club you're with, and what that actually entails from a, I guess, day-to-day, week-to-week basis?
Sure. Well, currently I'm the director of player development with FC Cincinnati of Major League Soccer. We are a fairly new club in Major League Soccer. We'll be entering, when this new season starts, knock wood, soon. We'll be entering our third season in the league. And my primary role when I came in here to Cincinnati was to really get the academy up and running and on its feet. The expectation is once we get that to a place where we're comfortable, my role will expand into connecting with our second team, our under 23s, and the first team to really to complete this player pathway, and for me to kind of oversee that player pathway between the first team and the development side. Currently, we've grown the academy pretty fast. We started, I want to say, a year and a half ago now with two teams, an under 15 and an under 17. And we made a very determined effort during the pandemic, during the lockdown, to actually grow the academy. So we grew our sides, and we have under 13, under 14, under 15, under 16, and under 19. So we expanded quite a bit. We started a residency program that's also under my remit. And we will be introducing the under 23s this spring as well. So there's a lot going on here in kind of an interesting time, right? To be trying to build something in a time when things are pretty much frozen. But I think it's fortunate that we have an ambitious program here, and I'm fortunate to be kind of overseeing this piece of it.
I guess the first thing is, sounds like you're very busy. Sounds like you've got a lot going on. I imagine for you coming into that role is quite exciting because you kind of get to mold the academy into obviously the club's vision, but also in a way that you think will best produce players through the pathway. So when you first were approached or first applied for the role, what was it that drew you to it? And I guess, and in those first 100 days that everyone speaks about, what type of things did you try to put in place so that the environment you were created was conducive to what you and the club wanted?
Well, I guess first I go back in time a little bit, because prior to this FC Cincinnati role, I had a similar role with both the Chicago Fire of MLS, and I was there. I had numerous roles there. I was a first team assistant, but my primary time there was spending developing their player pathway there as well, with the academy through the system there. And then I moved on to the Portland Timbers, in a completely different area of our country, in the far northwest of our country, and had a similar role there. I kind of, I consider myself a builder, and I think everyone who truly is in the development phase works in this gap, right, between what is and what can be, right? I think what we do in the development phase is we look at whatever our project is. Our project could be an individual, our project could be an academy, our project could be the whole club. But if you're a developer, you look at it and you say, okay, this is where we're at. This is the potential we see. How do we get there? And we work to build that. So I consider myself a builder. And one of the things that attracted me to FC Cincinnati was the fact that it was basically a startup. When I came in, there was no imprint of a previous academy. It was a clean slate. It was a club that was new in the MLS. It was an expansion team. And I felt that there was an ambition within the club. As a developer, there was an ambition within the club to move players through the system. They wanted to have homegrown players on the first team, right? They wanted to build this foundation of their first team around academy players, understanding that this is a process and it takes time, but it was an ambitious process. And I really liked the fact that it provided an opportunity for me to come in, as you said, to kind of imprint something right from day one. And when you mention the first 100 days, boy, it's the U.S. is a real interesting. It's an interesting place to work when you're thinking about building something, because if you go back in time into the development of soccer in this country, it was really an upside down model. The game grew at the base first, right? There was for many years there wasn't a professional league, or there was a multitude of professional leagues that came and lasted a year, lasted 5 years, disappeared, right? So the strength in the U.S. and strength, I mean numbers and money, right, was at the base. And all of these youth clubs around the U.S. Were kind of mom and pop businesses, right? So when you come in and try to start an academy, that's free, that's funded. One of the first things you have to do in the first 100 days is understand your marketplace and how you're affecting all these mom and pop businesses, right? All these other youth clubs. So it's a tricky environment to navigate when what you're trying to do can have an economic impact on someone's livelihood. And it's a bit different here, because I think, if you look at the rest of the world, youth clubs, non-professional academies, are very happy to push players through the pipeline and get them to the Southamptons, the Man Cities, the Chelsea academies, right? But in the U.S., it's not that it's not that forgiving, right? Because when you pass a player, oftentimes in the U.S., you're losing income, you're breaking up a team that helps to support the club, the bottom line. So it's a little tricky. So the first 100 days, it's always about navigating your environment, and coming in. And in my mind, and I've done it different ways in different places, but when I came to Cincinnati, I really wanted to be somebody that was inclusive with what we did. And our idea is to help raise the level of youth soccer in the Cincinnati region as a whole, and work with people. And hopefully that encourages people to send their best talent our way.
Was that something you'd learned from previous experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. The U.S. is such a big country. When you talk about building a program in Chicago versus building a program in Portland, it's almost like two different countries, right? The landscapes are so different. Even if you were to look at the political landscapes, right, They're so different. The way children are raised in the Pacific Northwest, and maybe what the value systems are in the Pacific Northwest could be different than Chicago, right? And history brings certain elements with it itself, right? What each area of the country's gone through. So it's very, you can draw comparisons while the language is the same. You can draw comparisons to, trying to start an academy in England and starting an academy in Spain. Two very different places to try to build something. So I found that I could use some of the experiences that I had in both those places when I came back to Cincinnati, and maybe try to make the model better, each time and learn. So, yeah. So Chicago had, it's a much different player pool. It's a much deeper player pool than either of Portland or Cincinnati. And I think that, as that has a lot to do. The talent pool has a lot to do with the success of your academy, right? Identifying talent. And when you have a very deep talent pool and to work with, you're fortunate. So in Chicago, maybe I came to the realization in Chicago that we were going to get the best players as young as we could, and we were going to develop them in-house. So we didn't have to get involved in the quagmire of hundreds of youth clubs around Chicago all fighting for the best players. We were just going to get the best at 10 years old and develop them. And that's what we did. And that was quite successful there. So it was a little bit of a different model. In Portland, when I came in, they had a setup that worked with the ODP programs and running leagues in Portland. And that had benefits and drawbacks, right? I think sometimes in Portland, when I look at it, I think some of the youth clubs in Portland saw the Portland Timbers Academy as making a money grab because we were running leagues and we were making money on running the leagues, and we were running ODP and we were charging players to come and try out at ODP. Maybe that wasn't the best model. So in Cincinnati, we're trying to do a little bit of both, actually, by going down to under 13 and then by trying to be inclusive with everybody. Everything we do is free. Everything we do is trying to make clubs better. We're really trying to invest in the local market. I think for Cincinnati, that's probably the best pathway.
And how does it challenge you as an individual? Obviously, I imagine you wouldn't have grown up in all these places. You would have had roots which may be very different to a Portland or a Chicago or Cincinnati. So when you're there for the first period or you're looking to go into that role, how does it challenge you to, I guess, find out what the city influence is or what the city's like, and then adjust your methodology or your ideas to that city? How does it challenge you, and how do you go about doing that?
Yeah. I fortunately, Cincinnati is similar to Chicago in some ways, right? Both kind of Midwestern, both kind of have a blue collar attitude, right? That the Midwest of the U.S., in my mind anyway, some might disagree with me, but the Midwest of the U.S. is kind of this blue collar. If we can't beat you, we'll outwork you, right? If we're not better than you, we'll outwork you. So Cincinnati was kind of similar to Chicago in that way. But I think it was really important for me was in trying to understand the environment here was also, as I built out my staff, it was imperative that I had people, right? The number is irrelevant at this point, right? But people that had roots in this community, that understood this community, that understood the youth landscape in this community. So that was important as I built out my staff, that I identified. I ended up identifying 2 people, but that I identified at least someone that was very familiar with the marketplace, that had the trust of the people in the marketplace, because often, and I'm an outsider coming in, takes time to build that trust. And when I started the program, I had about 30 days. So it was really important for me to identify those people that could help me to connect and gain and build trust in the marketplace.
So I'm assuming for you then, your considerations, or when you're looking at how you're going to approach a particular subject or approach a particular model, you might go to these 2 people and go, from your experiences in this market, how has this been received previously?
Yeah, absolutely. I think across the board, regardless of the topic, the idea of collaboration is huge for me. The idea of shared knowledge is huge for me. The idea of how I approach things within the culture we try to develop in the academy and in the club is really, really important to me. So, and I try to approach those things the same way, right? And it was really important to me to get these two people I found in place, and for them to understand that we're a team. This isn't about me telling you how to do this. This is about us working together to figure out the best thing, because I don't have all the answers. So I was very reliant on the two guys that had the best information in market, along with a lot of other people in the club when I got here, whether they were necessarily on the soccer side or the commercial side. I mean, we were very collaborative in our approach, and we shared knowledge and probably tried to make our mistakes really quickly, right? Fail really fast and learn from that. And I think we're still learning and we're still failing. So, but that's something we embrace, to be fair.
I'd imagine it must be challenging, because this wouldn't be unique to you. This would be for people going up and down the country trying to implement programs, academy programs, styles of play, types of play. First team managers going place to place where they're trying to get to know the region to then know what type of football or what type of product is going to work in that environment. Do you think that a lot of the successes and failures in that region come down to there being the right fit of the person or personality to the place?
It's an interesting question. Yeah, I think it certainly can be, right? Because knowledge has value. So if you have a good knowledge of a region, of a territory, that's worth something, for sure. Wow, so many questions come to mind, because we are really, really an interesting country in this, right? Okay, and when we start to think about development in the U.S., I think we really have just professionalized it over the last 10 to maybe 15 years, right? And that started with U.S. soccer coming in and implementing a league called the Development Academy, and they identified the best clubs, the best academies around the U.S., along with the MLS academies, and developed a league, and that was our competitive platform, and we did that for almost 15 years. And as you were asking that question, it brought to mind, when this development academy started, everyone played the same way. The entire country, we all were encouraged and we were evaluated on the fact that the federation mandated, and I say that loosely, that we played a 4-3-3, that we built from the back, right? This is how they wanted us to play. So obviously, in some regions, it doesn't fit, right? We know that Brazil plays one way because maybe the climate, and these things are all have an effect. But I think that starting point to come in 15 years ago and say, everybody, you know what? We're going to play this way. I think that was based on the fact that the United States was upside down, as I go back to before. Soccer was driven by the pay-to-play model, 100% by the pay-to-play model. The pay-to-play model is driven by winning. So in the youth clubs, everyone was playing just to win. Because if my team wins, I'm going to get the best 3 players from that team and the best 3 players from that team. I'm going to end up having 10 teams in an age group. I'm going to end up making more and more money for my club. So it was kind of a vicious cycle, and it didn't really have its roots in developing players. It had its roots in winning games and making money, right? So what the federation did was good in a way. You can make the argument that they should have loosened the reins a little bit, and then once things started to go in the right direction, loosen the reins and allow people to play differently and different styles. And they did that actually in the last few years of Development Academy. That was actually happening, and you were beginning to get different styles, different flavors. The MLS teams were beginning to drive that because some MLS teams, have different styles. If you're a New York Red Bull, obviously you have a different style than say an FC Cincinnati. So you began to see these things. So I think we took a big step back that allowed us to evolve in a much better way. And I think you're beginning to see the fruits of those labors now, as you see there's more and more American players heading to Europe and finding success. And there's numerous reasons for that. But I think you're starting to see that the U.S. is finally getting serious about player development.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's a similar issue that we have in England, is that everyone says, what's your academy philosophy? And a lot of the time people say we press from the front, we play out from the back. And those are two phrases you hear quite a lot. And what's become more and more relevant at the moment is people looking for variety. So sometimes people clubs are going to grassroots teams where maybe they might go a little bit more direct, or they might play two up front rather than one, or they might, be a bit more imaginative in terms of what they deliver, just so that the players get a different spice. So I think what you're linking to there in terms of having that model does work, and it's just in terms of how people can differentiate. I just think it's interesting in terms of your country is so big, and it's very different. And I think from the outside looking in, I love American sports. I love watching them. You look at the differences between even climate, Massachusetts with Boston. You watch the New England Patriots where it's snowing and everyone's wrapped up, and then I'm a Miami Dolphins fan. You go down there and everyone's got sunglasses and sandals on. So I would imagine the type of person that would thrive in each of those situations, environments, would be potentially very different. So I can imagine sometimes having the right person in the right place at the right time to really captivate that audience would be quite important.
Yeah, I think that's very important. But I also think in time, perhaps not quite yet, but in time, it's going to develop maybe a more resilient player in the long run, right? Because you do hear when European players come to MLS, one of the things you hear all the time, right? Well, it takes them time to adapt because there's so much travel. Well, yeah, you're hopping on a plane for 6 hours. You're playing in New York on one day, midweek later, you're going to LA to play, and you're on a plane for 6 hours to get back and forth, right? So there is some adaptation. And like you said, one weekend you could be playing in 40 degrees, and next weekend you're down in Houston, Texas, where it's 90 degrees and humidity is 100%, right? So it does develop a different type of player from the resiliency standpoint, but it also, I think it develops a different type of player tactically as well. And if you look at the modern game, we all talk about tactical flexibility now, right? It's just the way it goes in the modern game. You heard Mourinho just the other day talking about how he spends less and less time worrying about the opponent because tactically they change, from week to week. It's so flexible anymore. So I think going back to this idea of it's a big country, we can build resiliency that way, but I think we can also build better players that are maybe tactically more flexible. And I also think that goes back to maybe the philosophy of the academy that in link with what you're saying, the academies are beginning to look, we're going to go here. We're going to look at maybe more direct players here. And then we're going to go over here and look at this youth club that has maybe more tiki-taka players, right? Well, now in an academy, perhaps our job is to develop an entree of players, right? That can fit the needs of any given need of a first team at any time, right? Because we all know sometimes the flavors in the first team change, right? I've been doing this for a while in the States, and I've worked with 15 different head coaches, over the last 12 years, right? So I think we need to ask ourselves in the development phase, what do we do in the academy that develops a player who is most suited for the future game? And I don't know that there's any one answer for that. because the future game is becoming so flexible.
So I guess linking this back to where we were at the start, obviously it sounds like your vision is to make, holistic players or well-rounded players within your setup. So I guess what is the academy vision for you guys? What does that look like? And then in those first, you said 30 days. What did you do in those first 30 days to try and make your academy set up it for a positive environment for when them players did begin to come in?
So I tend to believe, I kind of have when I think about players and when I think about the future game, I guess I have this idea in my head of every player is like a 10 plus. Okay. And I'm using the number 10 because I think about a player who's comfortable on the ball, who's a good decision maker, who can break lines on the run, good range of passing, right? And that can play somewhere in the middle of the park, right? That can play with 360 degrees. Okay? So when I look at players and when I think about developing players, I think about every player, regardless of what position they're playing in, they have to have some of those characteristics of a 10. And I believe that's where the modern game is going. And you can see it with inverted fullbacks, right? Our 2 and our 3 are not just playing on the wide areas anymore. They're coming to the interior of the field and they're playing as essentially central midfielders, right? We have our center backs now breaking the line on the run, drawing out pressure to play through lines. That's some roles of a 10, right? Some profiles of a 10. You're looking at goalkeepers. You're looking at goalkeepers spraying the ball around the park, right? Having some elements of a 10. So when I look at building out a roster or I look at building out a team with this idea of tactical flexibility, right? I need to have players that can function as a 10 wherever they happen to be on the field, right? So one of the first things I do, and to take a step back, that doesn't mean I want all 10s. So I don't want anybody listening to go, oh, he just wants all 10s. No. I want characteristics of a 10 in every position, but then there are going to be some physical profiles, some technical profiles that put players in an area of the field. Okay, so if I'm a 10 who is extremely fast and very good in 1v1 attacking duels, he's likely to end up in the 7 or 11, right? If I'm a 10 who is good in the air and I happen to be 6'3", well, I'm going to be the new center half or center back, right? So I think when you start with that foundation, you need to start with a player who is very comfortable with the ball in possession. So what I've done at all the academies I've been at, my first task is to dominate possession. And that's what I've done in Chicago. That's what I did in Portland, and that's what we're doing now in Cincinnati. And you can get the analytics on that. Now, the analytics will tell you how many passes you're making. The analytics will tell you how many passes you're connecting. And unfortunately, the analytics will also tell you where you're connecting those passes, right? So I found when I've started all of these projects, we've dominated possession in our own half, So then that gives me the building blocks of where I want to go next and how we want to play more forward-thinking possession, right? How we want to create more opportunities going into the final third. And these building blocks begin to grow on one another to eventually where you get an academy built on your principles, your sub-principles, whatever they may be, but now you begin to have a real identity within your academy.
So would you look for coaches that are committing to do that when you were looking to fill out kind of your staffing positions in Cincinnati?
First, I look for the coaches that will fit the environment and the culture, and that are developers. That's what I want to talk about first and foremost when I speak with individuals to come in and work here. I want to find out what they believe as people. I want to find out the type of people they are. I want to find out what they think about development. Because in my mind, there's a lot of different ways to do this, but you can't do it with the wrong people, right? You have to have the right people. I think if you get the right people with the right mindset, you can do anything. And I'm in this to learn as much as anybody in my organization, right? So I first start with getting the right people that are open-minded, that have a growth mindset, that want to be developers, and that want to grow, want to learn. So that's my starting point. And then I feel as though I want to have a flavor, and I want my flavor to be different, right? I want to have coaches on staff that are in different places in their careers. I want to have coaches on staff that bring different ideas. I want to have coaches on staff that have different playing backgrounds or no playing background. So I'm all about that, because I think all those different pieces coming together make us better, right? Because if we get the culture right, where it's very easy to challenge one another with different ideas. So I think I've certainly passed on coaches that I think are fantastic coaches to go with coaches that I think have a long way to go. And I've gone with the coaches that have a long way to go, because I think often as you're growing, other people grow along with you. And I think that's the beauty in the process.
So obviously you get those types of people in your environment, and you're in a melting pot, if you like. So then how do you transmit those messages to the players in terms of, we want to dominate possession, we want you to all be comfortable in whatever position you're in? Do you have like an academy philosophy that you've put together that the players are aware of, or the coaches kind of work through? What does that look like?
Yeah, we all work off the same playbook. But I don't dictate what the coaches do within the playbook. So the playbook gives you a framework, but then the coaches have the freedom to experiment and be creative within that framework. So I often find it contradictory when we talk about developing creative players. Right. And unfortunately, I think too often when we think about creative players, we only think about the 1v1. And I think that's a mistake. I think there's creativity in small groups. There's creativity in large groups. There's creativity individually. And I think sometimes we miss that. But we speak about developing creative players. And then we take our coaching staff and we say, okay, Monday, do this session. Tuesday, do this session. Wednesday, do this session. And as a coach, I sit there and I say, boy, does this director really trust me? Does this director really value me if he's telling me this is what I have to do all the time? It's no different than a player. I have to trust a player. I have to let a player know that I value him. I have to let a player know that I have confidence in him, and I have to accept that he's going to make mistakes. We have to embrace that and grow from that. So you have to do the same thing with your coaches, right? The same thing. So we have a framework. We have our principles, which are very general. And then we have our sub-principles, which are very specific. And our principles and sub-principles are in place to essentially make sure that at the end of the process, you and I understand or see the game in the same way from these core principles and sub-principles that don't change whether we're playing direct or whether we're playing indirect. So that's kind of our philosophy and our model within our academy. And go ahead.
No, sorry, I was just going to say, are these principles, sub-principles explicit to the players? And are you able to give us any examples of those?
Sure. So we work. So the brunt of our work is done with our sub-principles. And our sub-principles are broken down into our phases of play. So for instance, within our building phase, one of our sub principles would be creation and use of space. So it's a broad idea of how players build relationships, take information from one another, and how we manipulate space in the building phase to advance into what we call our unbalancing phase. Okay, so within this sub principle, perhaps we may be dropping the 6 between the two center backs, but perhaps we won't. Perhaps we need that 6 to be higher and work between the lines, the first line of pressure and the second line of pressure. Well, how do we determine that? We determine that by where we are in the field. We determine that by where our teammates are, where the ball is, how the opponent's pressing, right? We determine all this by relationships. So that's one of our sub principles that we work on. And we have roughly within the 4 phases of play, we have within the 4 moments of the game, we have roughly 26 sub principles that we work on. In the attacking moment, defending moment, in the transitional moments. And then it's really important that these sub principles work in link with our methodology. Okay, our methodology of teaching. So when I think about a sub principle of creation and use of space in the building phase, now our methodology has to be in link with what we're trying to get out of this sub principle, and our ultimate idea now of developing an intelligent, autonomous player, right? Which I think we all talk about that. We all talk about we want to develop an intelligent, autonomous player, and then what do we say? We see players on the sideline yelling at the players, telling them what to do with every play. So clearly, you're not in link there with your methodology and your teaching style with what you want to get. So we have to link that with our methodology, and our methodology is very discovery based. That's not to say we don't have. I don't want to get too deep into our methodology, but our methodology is a lot of my education is in the French methodology. But I've spent a lot of time in Europe. I've spent a lot of time in Spain, and then of course I have my American roots here, right? So I've kind of tried to blend that. But if our mission is to create this intelligent, autonomous player, then we have to see that in our training field. We have to see that in the way we coach our players, and it has to be in link with our sub principles. If our sub principles tell players what to do all the time, then it's not in link with creating autonomy and creating intelligence. So when I say creation and use of space in the building phase, there are a lot of different ways to do that. And I don't want to tell our players, you have to drop your 6 between the two center backs now and put them through this in patterns and put them through this in a directive system. I want them to understand when and how, based on relationships on the field, that we drop our 6. So we have discovery. We have three main pieces in our training sessions. We have a discovery phase, where it's all about creating an activity through constraints and rewards that a player discovers the right answers to certain sub-principles that we're building. Then we have what I would consider a situational phase in our training, which is more directive. So I map out a situation that's happening and I direct the players through it. And then we have a phase which would be more considered more directive, and it has more to do with mechanics and maybe technical aspects of the game. So, for instance, we don't do a lot of patterns, but I might do a pattern in link with creation and use of space in the building phase as a way to paint the picture for a player to come back into a discovery game or discovery activity for them to link. Does that make sense?
Yeah, just kind of a, framework in it for them. So saying these are possible outcomes you could use is now down to you as an individual to figure out when's the appropriate time to use these solutions at the end.
Yeah, but very, very critical that you develop the activity in such a way that that picture is painted over and over for them. Right. So to give an example, everybody talks about switching play or switching point of attack, however you want to phrase that, right? So for me, we would focus on this. This would be a sub-principle of ours in the unbalancing phase, right? So you're talking about the middle third of the field, right? And you're talking about finding a way to unbalance the defense so that now you can progress into what we consider our finishing phase, right? So often, if you can kind of picture this, I've seen many times, a 4-goal game, for instance, where you create, let's say you take the middle third of the field, so you're wider than you are deep on the field, and you put 4 goals out on the field, and you create whatever your numerical situation is, and you put the ball out, and you let them play, and you direct the players, right? You switch the ball now, right? And you're trying to switch the ball now, and you're trying to play and knock the ball in one of those 4 goals, right? I think we've all seen that exercise. And listen, I've done it 1,000 times, right? But if an illustration of how you link the methodology to the principle or the sub-principle you want, what I do now is, I ask myself, first off, what is the objective of this sub-principle? So the objective of switching point of attack is to progress into the finishing phase, to accelerate play, to advance into the finishing phase, right? With the hopeful outcome of a high potential, high percentage chance on goal. Okay, so if I put 4 goals out there and we switch the point of attack and I finish by knocking the ball in a small goal or something, we haven't progressed the ball. So you're never allowing the player to advance into the next phase of play. Okay, so for me, that's a red flag, right? Now I look at it and I go, okay, so I have to allow the player to advance into the next phase of play. Okay, fair enough. I'm going to take those goals away. So maybe I allow the player now. Maybe I use in the wide areas, if we want a big switch, let's say, I use flags that they run through, right? They can either play someone in, they can play a diagonal ball in, they can play a leading ball in, a player can drive the ball in, whatever you want to look at. You can get deeper into it and want relationships with your 2 and 7, 3 and 11, whatever you see. But they're progressing the ball now into the finishing phase, and you allow them to do something there, whatever it might be. Maybe 2 defenders can drop and they have a look at goal, whatever. But you've allowed them to progress, which is the ultimate thing that you want. You want to see the game switch play. You want to see it. You want to see the game accelerate, and you want to see the game get into the final phase. Okay, you've done that. But now how do you paint this picture? How do you get this picture without you having to tell the player over and over again what to do? So what I would do is I would create 3 vertical channels on the field. I can vary the width of the channels depending upon what I'm looking for, but I would create 3 vertical channels on the field, and I would simply give an instruction to the defending team and say, you must align in the 2 vertical channels closest to the ball carrier. So now every time I take the ball into the right side channel, the defending team is aligned in the center channel and their left channel. So the defending team is aligned underneath the ball carrier, which is the picture you're looking for, right? When you're thinking about switching point of attack, you're looking for an over-rotated defense. In this instance, if we're looking for a big switch. So this constraint on the defending team with these zones has created an over-rotated defense every time my team brings the ball to a wide channel. Okay, so now I ask the player simply, what do you see? And you have a dialogue with the players, right? And now you start to get into the nuances of it. Okay, so how do you accelerate the play to the other side of the field? Who needs to be there? What do you do? But through the activity, through the detail of the activity connected to the sub-principle, connected to the methodology, within that activity, you are working on creating an intelligent, autonomous player.
So on a weekly basis, I'm not sure what your schedules look like in terms of your age groups or what they will look like kind of post-COVID, but would you have a sub-principle that your coaches work on during that week, and then they can kind of choose as kind of what they do within that week? Or how does that look from a week-to-week, monthly basis?
Yeah, we basically, right now we work and within our group, within our coaching staff, we are very collaborative on how we address this. And we can be flexible on it by what we're seeing as an outcome. But for instance, we'll right now, because of where we are with COVID and games and whatnot, we're working basically, we're training 5 days a week, and we work on 2-week blocks that are heavy on the attacking side with the ball, right? So 2-week blocks, which are three days of attacking, 1 day of defending, 1 day of making sure we're getting into the final phase, into the finishing phase. So we'll do that for 3 weeks. And then the 4th week, we'll flip it. It'll be 3 days heavy on the defending principles, 1 attacking principle, and 1 in the finishing phase. So we want to make sure every week we're getting 1 strong day in the finishing phase. And then it will be 3-1 attacking for 3 weeks out of a 4-week block. Or that 1 week will be 3-1 defending, right? And we will prescribe the sub principle to work on, but we won't prescribe the activity, if that makes sense. So the being a year and a half into it here at Cincinnati, I've brought activities with me that I've shared, but essentially what we're doing now is we're building out our activities. And like I said, we experiment quite a bit. Our coaches are free to experiment, and then they come back and they kind of reflect on their training sessions. I like this or I don't. And if we like it, it becomes one of our favorites and we share amongst staff, and they can tweak it for the age group or what have you. If we don't like it, we re-examine it and say, look, is it just wrong, or is there a different way to fix it? And we go back and try to fix it.
Okay, so I've got quite a lot of questions off the back of that. So in terms of the sub-principle, so say, for example, you were working on creating space from the back and trying to play. If you did that for kind of, like you said there, a 3-week period and then a month, the other one, would the following month, when you go to more defensive work, would you work on the opposite? So would you go to pressing from the front so that they're getting to double up? And I guess the other question, sorry to cut you in there as well, is why do you place such an emphasis on making sure there's a finishing block in every week?
So the first point, we work counter principles as well. So when we're working on creation and use of space, in the building phase, there is an assistant coach working against the ball. Right. And the assistant coach, we don't train it, but the assistant coach has phrases, right, that he continually uses against the play. So if that makes sense. So we might, as we're building, an assistant coach may be giving some phrases or some encouragement to the team working against the ball in link with one of our sub principles on the defensive side. So that works reasonably well. We put an emphasis on the attacking side, just because we feel that that's just our philosophy. We want to attack, right? We want to focus on that. We also think culturally, we can get really good messages across there. Now that's not to say, like I said, that's not to say we won't change up our planning at any time if we feel we have a deficiency, that we won't flip a block, and go strong in the defensive block and even it out for a month, 2-2. We're free to do that as long as there's a reason. And the other question on the finishing, once a week we try to get in. We just feel it's a deficiency. We just feel it's a deficiency. It's remember when we started the process, everything was about dominating possession. Okay, so now by doing this once a week, getting into the finishing phase, we're starting to flip it a little bit to where they understand that, yeah, it's about dominating possession, but we're always being positive in our possession and wanting to go forward. So it reinforces a message to them. And look, we could be great at everything if we're not good at finishing.
Have you seen benefits? Have you seen kind of the standard of finishing improve across the age groups from doing that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the numbers speak. We've scored a lot. Look, COVID's affected everything, right? So we had basically 6 months in a regular academy setting. That's all we had, 6 months. And then the next 6 months, it was a COVID setting. So, but so far the numbers have validated, yes, across the board, we're getting into much better areas of the field now. We're creating many more chances, more high percentage chances, and we're scoring more goals while maintaining high percentages of possession and passes.
No, I think it's really interesting. I know it's a big gripe of a lot of teams of saying, "Oh, we played really well, we got into the final third, but we couldn't finish." Yeah. And it was a discussion point in one of my recent courses where they're saying, "How do we create people who are better at finishing?" I think it's really interesting that you've made kind of a concerted effort in your curriculum to say, you know what, ultimately that's one of the most important aspects of the game. If you could have a really bad game, get 2 chances. If you score them both, you win 2-1. So I really like the fact that you've played a real emphasis on that.
And what we've done, that's I don't know if this is, it's interesting to me anyway, but everybody knows where the highest percentage chances come from, right? It's coming from, just inside the side of the box or the side of the box, right? With balls across the front of the goal, balls cut back, right? That's where that's where goals are coming from. So I would go out and I would watch training sessions and balls are being whipped in from wide areas of the field. And I would say, why are we doing that? We evidence-based. We know that those are low percentage at every level of the game. Balls whipped in from the corners of the field, right, are low percentage. So why are we training that? So we put a real emphasis on our training on getting to these specific areas of the field and how we get there within our principles, right? And our principles connect to that. So there's no like I said, our sub principles, doesn't matter if you're going to be direct, doesn't matter if you're going to be indirect. Our sub principles work with any idea of the game. But when I get into the final third, or when I get into the finishing phase of play, I want to be evidence based. I don't want to train things over and over again that are really low percentage. I want to train things that are high percentage. And I think that's been really good for us.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think it's an interesting concept of having that into your program once a week to say, we're going to really focus on this and be really interested to see the benefits of it long term if you get, those younger players coming through. So you mentioned that you did 5 days a week. What does that look like per age group? So in terms of does that differentiate from your under 15s down to your under 9s? How does that change from age group to age group?
Well, we have 13s right now, 13s to 19s.
Okay, sorry.
So all the teams go 5 days a week right now because we don't have games at the moment. So we'll go 5 days a week. Sometimes we'll find a scrimmage. And then depending upon where we are in our physical planning, they may have, things are so fluid right now with COVID. They may have a day off. We may feel they need a day off or maybe not. everybody's on that same schedule. As we get into our season, it's interesting in the States. I found Fridays off are important. Everywhere I've been, we've trained once we get into our regular cycle of matches. I've trained Monday through Thursday, Fridays off. Games are it's give and take in this country because of travel distances, whether it's a Saturday, whether it's a Sunday, sometimes it's a double fixture. But let's just say we have a match on Saturday. I've given Fridays off with a match on Saturday. If we're on the road, it's travel on Friday. So it's either a flight or a bus on Friday. But if we're home, we still have Fridays off. And this was, I had to evaluate whether it was more important to have the players in on Friday to train or to have them at home so they're not sitting in a car in rush hour traffic on Friday evenings for 2 hours each way and then training. And because players come from a long way in the States, right? And depending upon the city, in Chicago on a Friday night to come train, you could live virtually 20 miles from the training center. And in Chicago, it's going to take you 2 hours to get there. Right. So it was my decision to say it's better to have them off rather than have them sitting in the car for 2 hours to train for an hour and a half, a light training session, and to go back in the car for 2 hours the night before a game. So I found that, you give up a little bit, but I think you get more by giving them that Friday night off. And I think this is where maybe culturally we need to think about what's right for the players. And you have to, it's a give and take. I'd love to have them on the field because I'd love to be doing more with them on the field, but maybe it's better to give them off because it helps them to perform better on Saturday if I give them that day off. And that's not necessarily from the physical standpoint. I'm talking more the mental standpoint, right? I'm talking more the psychological standpoint. I mean, sitting in a car for 2 hours and then going to training for an hour and a half on a light training session the night before a game, right? And then getting in the car for another 2 hours. I have homework to do. Psychologically, it takes a toll on the player.
Do you have any distance rules in terms of how far kids are allowed to travel to and from training, or?
Yeah, we really don't have rules on it, but if we have a small residency program here in Cincinnati, so we homestays, right? So, and we have players from all over the country. We have players from Las Vegas, Nevada. We have players from Florida. But we also have players from Louisville, Kentucky. That's about an hour and a half away. And they're not in residency. They drive. We have players from Lexington, Kentucky, an hour and a half away. We have players from Indianapolis, Indiana, an hour and a half away. So it seems to have worked out that players an hour and a half away are willing to make the drive and can manage the drive. Beyond that, it's a bit too far.
And the residency, would they do schooling like in Cincinnati and then kind of do football in the evenings? Is that how that works, similar to what we have over here?
Yeah. Right now, that's the way it looks. They have a choice. They can do public schooling, at the school closest to the residency house, to the family that they're living with, or they can do online schooling. We have pretty robust online schooling here in the States and here in Cincinnati specifically. So we do encourage those residency players to do online schooling. And we encourage that because of the built-in flexibility, and that in non-COVID times, we do quite a bit of individual development plans with the players. So in non-COVID times, we'll bring players in the early afternoon, and we'll do some individual stuff, small group stuff, and then they'll come back in the evening for their team training. We can't do that right now with COVID just because of the protocols with the first team and the bubble. So we can't have crossover with the first team players within the facility. But in good times, we'll do that.
Going back to a comment you made earlier, which was around kind of the pay-to-play model, and where obviously, to a degree, the people want to win so that they're able to get more players across to perform better, etc. How have you found the juggling that of changing from what could essentially be called like a performance culture, where they want to win every Saturday, to
Yeah.
a development one where actually you might encourage your centre back to take a really risky turn to get out of trouble, and if he gives it away, that's okay because that's a learning experience. How have you found that challenge of going from quite high pressure to performance to actually we want you to make mistakes because that's how we're going to improve you as a player?
Yeah, so tricky. Um, when I first started to do this in Chicago, it was the first fully funded programming of its time, right? When the MLS team started to do their academies, it was the first time soccer was free in this country. So there was, you can imagine, there was this big swing between pay to play and free, right? And you would it was really interesting for me to juggle this, because it was two things. You had players that would come in from this pay to play model that were 100% we got to win performance, right? On the day. Don't take risk because we got to win. But there were parents and players to an extent that were coming from this consumer-driven model that said, well, listen, I'm the consumer, right? You need to do what I say. So if my kid's not playing, well, my kid needs to play, right? Because he's performing. And I'm saying, well, no, he's not really doing the things that we want to do. So we have to continue to work on this, and build up the way we want it to be. So there is conflict between, no, I'm the consumer. The coach has to, what's the phrase? The consumer's always right, So there was that. And then there was this other side that you brought up, this performance side, where we're trying to change the way players view the game, and maybe slow down a little bit, guys, right? Let's look at this. Let's take a longer term view on this. It's not about winning today. It's about winning tomorrow. It's about winning years from now, right? So yeah, so very, very tricky. So I found myself in the early days, I wasn't necessarily the coach I wanted to be, right? Because one, I had to win. Because here I am in this MLS academy, and if I'm losing to the youth clubs, that's not good. So I had to push my players to win, sometimes in a way I didn't want them to, right? So that I beat the youth club, so that the youth clubs could see, oh, that's a better model. So now I could try to find a way to get the best players over. So it was tricky. It was difficult. So I found myself pushing really hard. And then over the years, I found myself we were able to win. And then, unfortunately, once we were able to win, I was able to take my foot off the gas and say, okay, let's step back and really look at this from the development picture. So I think this is an evolution that coaches go through, and it's also, I had finished my playing career, and my playing career was about winning. And, we're getting into a lot of different things. And I identified as a player still. I didn't identify as a developer. So when I got on the field and as a coach, I wanted to win. I was very directive. I was telling players what to do all the time, right? I wasn't a coach educator at that time. I was a driver. I was a motivator. I probably wasn't a great coach, right? So those were all things I had to learn over time. Now I know it's about creating a psychologically safe environment, right? It's about creating an environment where a player can come in, where a player knows that our entire coaching staff is about the long-term development of that player. It's not about that player's going to get crucified if he makes a mistake. It's going to be about that player making a mistake and learning from a mistake. It's going to be about our players understanding that we encourage mistakes. It's about our players understanding that we trust our players, right? It's about our players understanding that we're committed to our players and we value our players, because ultimately that's the environment, along with challenging them in the proper way, where you create this zone of growth. And there's a lot to that, but it's taken me a long time. And
Do you think that approach would have worked in Chicago? Because I think you're in quite a unique situation where maybe you had to act in that way in order to get the best players to buy in and then come to then allow you to act maybe the way you wanted to now.
Yeah, Michael, that's a great question. And I tell myself that, when I want to make believe I'm really smart, I go, oh yeah, I did that really well, because we won national championships and we pushed guys through to the pros. And I want to tell myself that, I was really smart when I did it that way. I don't know what the answer is to that. All I know is that everything evolves. I know that for a fact. I know that doesn't stop, and I know that I have to continue to evolve, and I have to continue to look at different ways of doing things. And at the moment, I'm looking at it this way, and I think it's right. But we may talk in 5 years, and we may be right back to where I was my first year in Chicago. I don't know.
Yeah, I think football and life's ever evolving, so it's always interesting to see how it changes. One thing that I'd seen kind of from the research with you, which kind of links into the environment that you're trying to create and whatnot, which would be interesting to hear your experience of, was when you were working with the national teams. In terms of the age group stuff. So I guess the first thing for me is, how did you go about finding players? Because as you said, United States is massive. So how did you actually go about locating what were perceived at that time as the best players? At that point, how did you then try and get them into camps, and what would the training camps look like? And then 3, I guess off the back of that, is how would you create an environment that you wanted for your team to look like, and so that everyone wanted to be part of it as well?
Yeah. Well, great questions. And look, I'm super blessed that, I've had the opportunity to work with great players in the club setup and in the first team setup and certainly in the national team setup. So, that was a real blessing, because I learned so much in working with a national team, right? Because it's so different than working with a club, right? I don't, you always hear this, right? And you hear about, oh, well, he's a great manager when it comes to national teams, but he's not such a great manager when it comes to being a club manager. So that was one of the things right there that I kept in mind as I started to work with national teams, right? Why do people say that? So that was one of the first questions that I asked myself, and I'll get to that. I get that. That's kind of the third part of your question. So the first part of your question is identifying. Really, really tricky in the U.S. because it is such a big country, but incredibly fortunate, right? Because you touched on it before. In different areas of the country, we have different styles of players. We have different flavors. You go down to Miami and you have a real Latin influence. You have a Central American influence down in, Miami. You come to Chicago, there's you got that Midwestern influence, but then there's a Polish influence and there's a Mexican influence around Chicago. So different areas of the country have different flavors. And I think that's really fortunate. I think that's a blessing for the US, right? So now as you begin to build out your national teams within your identity of the national teams, and we talk about tactical flexibility being where the game is going, you have some pretty good options, as you get things right here. It's not a small country where maybe you can play this way, but it's a little harder tactically to introduce different flavors. So we're fortunate on that, but it's tricky to identify. So U.S. soccer gets knocked on their player identification a lot, and I disagree. I think U.S. soccer has, we've grown, we've evolved. It's still pretty new in this country, right? Like I said, 15 years. we've added more and more talent scouts across the country. I think there's over 100 and some talent scouts right now that work to identify players for U.S. soccer. And we are getting better at identifying talent. I think one of the issues we had for many, many years in the United States is we identified our talent based on other American sports, right? That we didn't know what a footballer looked like. So we would identify talent based on American football or American basketball, right? And that's a different look. That's a different player, right? And I disagree 100% when you hear there Americans say, when our best players play soccer, boy, watch out. When our best athletes play soccer, boy, watch out. I'm like, that there's no relationship to that, right? What does a great footballer look like? A great footballer, a great soccer athlete, football athlete is a great mover, is a good mover, right? Has balance, has agility, has all those things. Not always necessarily power, strength, size. Those are things that are American footballers we look at, right? So our identification process has evolved quite a bit. We're doing much more licensing. We're doing much more education. We are looking and beginning to understand what late developers are. Very, very, very important in the development cycle to understand what a late developer is and how you nurture late developers, because often those late developers at the end of the game, they're your best players, right? So it's really important. We're doing a much better job at identifying those players, and also in identifying key characteristics of players that we want on the field for the national team. So we have a profile with the national teams that we identify players, and we have a lot of people out working on that. So that's a good thing. Where I think we come up short, sheer numbers, right? Sheer numbers. When in this country, in my opinion, these are my thoughts, we should have at least 3 national teams at every age group, right? And at any given time, you can have a performance national team. So the under 17s are preparing for the under 17 World Cup. You're going to send your under 17 performance national team to the under 17 World Cup. But you can have an under 17, you can have a B team and a C team, let's call it, that can be filled with late developers, guys that we're not sure have had the right environment, guys that haven't had opportunity. So you're working with a pool of 60 players on a regular basis, providing them the same opportunities that this performance team gets. Because I think our country is big enough to do that. And I think in the end, when you get to the full national team, you'll reap tremendous benefits from that. And you can see, Belgium did that, right? Belgium did that with a lot of late developer teams at age groups. I mean, for sure we can do that in this country. And I think that's where we come up short. But back to the identification process, we're getting better. The second part of your question was, what do camps look like? Yeah, I mean, you get thrown a team. Sometimes I was involved with picking the team. Sometimes I wasn't, right? And depending upon where you are in cycles and stuff, you get thrown a team. You get them for 2 or 3 days, and then maybe you're in a competition. So on the field, a camp, we work on U.S. soccer's principles of play, right? We don't get, national teams are so reliant on good club programs, right? They're so reliant on the individual clubs doing so much in the development that, when you get the players, they're adaptable, they're moldable, they understand what you're talking about. So I found that in the camps, whether it's an identification camp or whether it's a short camp preparing for a competition, it was about just, getting the guys together, giving them some kind of a base, reiterating the big principles of the national team's program, and then hoping that the clubs have done a really good job in developing them and that they can understand where you have to change and you have to have different nuances, right? And then I guess the last part, and for me, this is where I go back to that question of, or the statements that you hear, he's really good with national teams, but he's not good with clubs. Or yeah, he's a great club coach, or he's not great with national teams. Okay, so this is where I came in with maybe a little bit of a different philosophy. I came in and I said, and the staff that we had assembled were thoroughly committed to a servant mentality. We were there 100% to serve those players so that they could perform at their best. So what I did often in camps was the first meeting in camp was, guys, tell me what it was like when you performed at your best. Tell me what it was like. Tell me what it was like when you were on the field. Tell me what it was like when you were off the field. Tell me what it was like. Tell me what the coaches were like. Tell me what staff was like. And we allowed them that input. And as a group, we said, there's no reason we can't provide that for you, right? There's no reason. Coaches, players, what are you like? What was, when you performed your best, what was the coach like? He was positive. He supported me. Okay, well, why can't I be that way? And I look around the room and I go, the assistant coaches, why can't we be that way? No reason we can't be that way, right? Staff, why can't we be that? Why can't we be positive with everything? Okay, so we did that. And then we asked them within the culture, what was it like, best teams that you've played on? And we talked about that. And we said, okay, we can be that. But Michael, it wasn't good enough to just say we can be that. We needed to make a concerted effort to intentionally be that, right? Because I'm a big one. I believe every team, every club, every organization has a culture. If you don't develop that culture intentionally, another culture is going to fill it. Because every vacuum will be filled, right? So if I come in and I say, yeah, I want to have this great culture. Guys, I want to do this. The first day we want to do this. We want to have all this stuff. We say, okay, everybody agree? Yeah, we all agree. Okay, thanks. See you guys later. If I don't do anything about it, if I don't intentionally build that, then something else is going to fill it. And that something else may not be something I want. So as an organization, as a team, when I'm talking about the national teams, we said, okay, how do we intentionally build this culture we want? And one of the things we wanted to make sure we were grateful for the opportunity every day. So, okay, so what do we do, guys? How do we make sure we're grateful? Well, every day we need to be thankful. We need to say thank you a lot. When we talk with one another, we have to recognize that we're grateful for this opportunity. And we did that. And everybody got a journal. And everybody with intention started to mark down when I saw one of my teammates do something nice for another teammate. When I saw one of my teammates do something nice for a member of staff. When I saw a staff member do something nice for a teammate. When somebody said thank you, we marked down. So we asked everybody to mark down twice a day when we saw somebody else do something. And then we asked everybody to mark down twice a day when we did something. So we were beginning to build this intentional culture that we wanted, right? And boy, the guys bought into it. It was really something to see. And, there were little telltale signs when new guys came into the team that maybe didn't fit into the culture right away, that maybe didn't adhere to the standards that we had. Me and the staff didn't have to do anything. The players took care of it. And it was really great to see, the belief that was generated, the trust that was generated was really incredible. Another thing I did before any players came in, I connected with those players' coaches, right? So, Michael, you will come into the camp. I connected with your coach, the coach that's with you every day. I didn't talk to him about the soccer. I didn't talk to him about the X's and O's. I said, tell me about Michael. What's Michael like? When does he perform really well? What does he need? Is he a guy who needs a lot of love, or does he need me to really ride him hard and push him? And I got all that information. So I feel really positive that these players that came into these national teams I had the under 16s for the most part, the 03s. Those guys performed really, really well. And it was very encouraging. Every player walked away feeling that whether they started or gave minutes, they walked away feeling that they really contributed to something special and that they got better. So, and honestly, didn't have to do much. And what was really interesting, the way it connected to this idea of tactical flexibility, our staff, we were able to throw ideas out to these guys that they had never done before. You know, we were 3-0 down against Holland, and we inverted the fullbacks. They had never done that before, but they embraced it and they did it because they knew they weren't going to be judged on getting it right or wrong. They were going to be judged on trying to get it right, you know? And it was great to see. They responded, you know, and it ended up in great results.
And I assume for you, the ability to identify the right individuals to make sure that they do come into the environment and obviously technically, tactically and stuff can fit in, but also that they do bring the right mentality as well. Because the last thing you'd want once you've got that positive environment is to get 2 or 3 bad eggs in the group and then all of a sudden it poisons everyone else. So I'd imagine the ability to find the right individuals and then be able to connect with them through the coaches like you've spoken about is a really important part of it as well.
Yeah, I think the most critical part to that is that's where you find out if the team is really owned by the team, right? And ultimately, you want the team to be owned by the team, right? My best coaching is when I sit on the sideline and do nothing at all, right? So to my point, you know, a couple guys come into the team and they don't really understand. You know, sometimes they just don't understand, and it's just a question of talking with them a bit. But I don't want that to be me. In the perfect world, I want that to be the players, right? Because then ownership is on the players. And I think to the point, look, I believe because I'm a developer, I believe everybody can get better, right? So I believe when you build a culture, there are people that aren't going to fit the culture, but I like to believe that they can learn and you can work with them and through this process, everybody grows and gets better. But to your point, in my mind, there is an expiration date, right? And a lot of that comes down to the idea of being willing or being able, right? So if a person is unable to understand something, I have no problem working and trying and helping, and you know, that's the process of teaching. If a person is unwilling, that's different. I feel like unwilling comes with an expiration point, you know, and I think that's where you have to kind of read the differences. And at some point, if a person's unwilling to be a part of this culture or embrace this culture, well, then you need to have that person out.
Listen, Larry, time has quickly beaten us. There's loads of stuff I would love to have asked, particularly about your time in the national team. Hopefully we'll be able to do that again at some point. I guess the biggest question for me, and something I ask everyone, which is, who's the best player or coach you've worked with or against, and why?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. But I've worked with a lot of, I've been really fortunate to have a lot of great mentors and work with a lot of great coaches. You know, there's so many guys that come to mind. I think there's a coach in the United States here, Bob Gansler, that had the 90 World Cup team, who was a great inspiration to me, and helped me so much. He was like this imposing figure always, right? And I know he and I have had a relationship. My dad and Bob had a relationship for years, right? So there was a time going back to when I was this younger coach, and I was this coach driven by winning and stuff, right? And I remember I was in a national quarterfinal, I think, and I forget the exact circumstances, but our team went down late in the game. And man, I got up on the sideline and I was driving everything. And I was pushing everything, and I was on every play, and I was on the referees, and you name it. I was that ugly coach. But we came back and we won. So in my mind, I'm like, yeah, I did it. I did the right thing at the right time. I pulled the right triggers, and whatever. I don't know. But I turned around and on the sideline, Coach Gansler was standing there looking at me, and I could see the disappointment that he had in me. Didn't have to say anything, but I could see the disappointment. Even though we won and we were going to the national finals, the Final Four, I could see the disappointment he had in me, right? And I knew I let him down. So that was a moment in my life where I was like, I don't want to be this guy anymore, right? And then go 5 years later, 4 years later, I'm coaching a team, a Chicago team, to go to the national Final Four. Had a very, very good team, a team that was every bit capable of winning the national championship, and probably should have, right? Had our best player, and we were playing probably the second best team in the country. We were playing, it was Chicago against FC Dallas. And we were outplaying them. Sloppy day. We were outplaying them. Everything was going well. But our best player was having one of the worst games of his life. Right? And he was not emotionally not handling it well. And not acting appropriately. And in some point in the first half, I took him off. And in retrospect, taking him off may very well have cost us the game. We lost 1-0. May very well have cost us the game. But after that game, Coach Gansler came up to me and he said, that was one of the best things I've ever seen you do, because you're going to make this player so much better by doing that in the long run. And he's going to be a pro, and you've done the right thing for him. And it may have cost your team, but there'll be another day and your group will grow from it. That group came back the next year and won the national championship. So it was, and we won it the right way. So that was, I think he had a tremendous influence on me in a lot of ways. So he would be a coach, one of many, and I'm leaving out a lot, but he's one of many for sure.
Perfect. Listen, I really appreciate your time and lots of interest in stuff. And as I said before, loads more that we haven't even touched on. So thank you for your time, and hopefully we can catch up again soon.
Well, Michael, this was really enjoyable. Great to speak with you. And I honestly believe it'll be awesome to speak with you more again. And I've learned a lot speaking with you as always.
Perfect. Catch you soon.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Initiative podcast with me, Michael Wright. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at the Sports Initiative Podcast, and share this podcast with friends and family. I'll see you next week.